Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this. We're pulling back the curtain today on a really critical and I think often overlooked period in early American history. We are talking about a defining decade of conflict that really set the stage for everything that followed. Today, we're diving deep into the Northwest Indian War.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're drawing from excerpts of Ohio's Fire, the Northwest Indian War. And our mission really is to get a handle on this conflict between the brand new United States and this powerful confederation of native tribes who were resisting encroachment in the Ohio Valley.
And that period you mentioned, 1785 to 1795.
Exactly.
That timeline is just so vital. We tend to think of the post-revolutionary period as all political wrangling, right?
Sure. The Constitutional Convention, Hamilton versus Jefferson.
Exactly. But at the exact same time, the young republic was fighting a brutal, sustained, decade-long war, a war for its own territorial survival.
This conflict was, and I don't think this is an overstatement, it was decisive for the future shape of the United States. It forced this nascent government to define itself, non-philosophical terms, but through hard power, right when the nation was at its most fragile.
You mean moving from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution?
Precisely, its most vulnerable moment.
So let's start by setting the scene for you. Why was this conflict almost inevitable? And why the Ohio Valley specifically?
Well, the sources make it very clear that while the U.S. had a claim to the land after the 1783 Treaty of Paris—
A claim on paper.
Exactly, a claim on paper. And that was, frankly, meaningless without military enforcement.
And there was an urgency to enforce it, right? It wasn't just about expansion.
No, not at all. To really understand the urgency, you have to look at federal finance. The United States was, to put it mildly, drowning in Revolutionary War debt. And the only real asset the government had in any abundance was land, specifically these western lands, which included the Ohio Valley.
So the plan wasn't just expansion for the sake of it. It was expansion as a debt solution.
That's the key. The famous land ordinances of 85 and 87 were passed for that exact reason, to survey and sell this territory to raise cash.
Desperately needed cash.
Desperately. So the game plan was sell the land to settlers, pay off the war debt, but that policy crashed directly into the reality on the ground.
Which was that the land was already occupied.
By numerous powerful native tribes who had not ceded their territory in any treaty that they recognized.
And the Ohio Valley itself, it wasn't just any piece of land, was it?
No, what's fascinating here is the sheer strategic importance. It was the central artery for anyone trying to move west. The Ohio River defined everything. For American expansionists, controlling that region was the key to the entire continent.
And for the native tribes.
It was the last line of defense. This was for their ancestral homes, their hunting grounds, everything.
So the sources define the combatants very clearly. You've got the United States trying to impose these new debt-driven land policies.
And on the other side, you have this pan-tribal confederation fighting to keep what was theirs.
And this wasn't just some localized skirmish handled by local militias. The native resistance was highly organized.
Oh, incredibly so. The unity shown by what's called the Western Confederacy was formidable. We're talking about the Miami, the Shawnee, the Delaware, and others. Coordinated on a massive scale. And crucially, led by brilliant military figures like the Miami war chief, Little Turtle, and the Shawnee leader, Blue Jacket. They knew this was an existential threat.
So that's the nature of the conflict. The U.S. saying, this land is ceded, we're selling it, and the tribe saying, this is our home, we will defend it.
Right. And this raises a really important question. How did this new American government, which was still finding its feet, approach this necessary bloody expansion?
It had to build an army, basically.
It had to build a viable, permanent military, which was something many of the founders were deeply, deeply wary of.
The fear of standing armies.
Exactly. And their first attempts, well, they were disastrous.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources just hammer this point home. The first U.S. attempts to take control were such massive failures they almost bankrupted the government's credibility.
We have to talk about two specific catastrophic defeats. In 1790, you have General Josiah Harmar leading an expedition that was, for the most part, completely routed.
Okay, so that showed the cracks in the system.
It did, but the real shock to the system came the next year, in 1791.
St. Clair's defeat.
St. Clair's defeat, absolutely. Arthur St. Clair, who was the governor of the territory, led the largest U.S. Army fielded up to that point.
How large are we talking?
Around 1,000 soldiers. He was ambushed by forces under Little Turtle and Blue Jacket near the Wabash River.
And it was a total rout.
It was a decimation. The sources are clear. This was, and still is, the greatest military loss ever inflicted by Native American forces on the U.S. Army.
Over 600 soldiers and camp followers were killed.
600.
600 casualties. I mean, that's not a setback. That is an existential crisis for a brand new country.
It was a defining moment. It forced Congress and President Washington to face the fact that their military was completely incapable of fighting this kind of frontier war.
So it became the catalyst for change.
For massive, immediate reform, it tested the very limits of the new Constitution's federal powers.
So they had to create a new kind of army.
Yes. They basically scrapped the old ad hoc system, and in 1792, they created the Legion of the United States.
Which was different how?
It was a centralized, professional, permanent standing army, funded and commanded directly by the federal government. It was exactly the thing the founders had feared, but it was what the Republic now needed to survive.
And the man they put in charge of this new professional force was General Mad Anthony Wayne.
Mad Anthony Wayne. His appointment was a statement in itself, and this legion was different. It was highly trained, highly disciplined, and they were specifically taught the kind of frontier tactics they needed to fight the Western Confederacy on their own terms.
So no more European-style line battles in the deep forest.
Exactly what led to the 91 disaster. They learned from their mistakes.
And the sources frame this as this continuous 10-year struggle. It's not like the war just stopped while Wayne was training his troops.
No, the tension was constant. But that shift from the failure of 1791 to what was coming in 1794, it shows how fast the U.S. government could adapt when its back was against the wall.
It must have been incredibly expensive.
Unbelievably so. Funding the Legion directly linked this frontier conflict to the core federal budget decisions happening hundreds of miles away in Philadelphia. This war wasn't some sideshow, it was driving federal policy.
Okay, so let's talk about the turning point, the moment the Legion proved its worth.
That would be the Battle of Fallen Timbers, August 1794. Wayne's Legion finally meets the Confederacy's forces near what is now Maumee, Ohio. And because of that superior training, that discipline, the logistics, all the lessons learned from St. Clair's defeat.
Wayne secures a decisive victory.
A decisive victory. And that single battle, just 3 years after the disaster of 1791, fundamentally shifted the balance of power.
It sent a message.
It showed the Native Confederacy that the United States could now project organized, professional, and sustainable military force deep into the interior.
And it broke the back of that unified resistance.
It did. And, just as significantly, the British, who had been sort of tacitly supporting the Confederacy from their forts nearby, they abandoned their allies after Fallen Timbers. They refused to offer them protection. And that really sealed the outcome.
So the war runs from 85 to 95. This battle in 94 is what paves the way for the end.
Precisely. The war officially ends with the Treaty of Greenville in August of 1795. And this is probably the most tangible result of the entire 10-year struggle.
So what did the Treaty of Greenville actually do? How much land are we talking about?
It completely changed the map of the Midwest. The tribes ceded enormous tracts of territory, basically most of what became the modern state of Ohio and parts of Indiana.
And that gave the federal government the clear title it needed to start selling.
Exactly. To pay its debts and, critically, to push the line of American settlement dramatically westward.
It's just amazing how the conclusion of this war lines up perfectly with the stabilization of the new U.S. government.
You can't separate the two. The military success was the practical validation of the new political system.
So we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding this decade, these failures, and then the ultimate success.
It's absolutely key. It's the key to understanding the entire pattern of Western expansion that followed in the 19th century. This conflict was the opening act. It was the template for how the U.S. would use federal power to achieve its goals.
It set a precedent, didn't it? That military failure would be met with an overwhelming federal response.
Even if that meant creating institutions like a permanent army that ran counter to the original political ideals of the founders, survival came first.
The results gave this new political experiment immediate, tangible momentum.
It validated the need for a strong federal government that could take decisive military action and manage its finances through territorial acquisition.
So, to synthesize this deep dive for everyone listening, the Northwest Indian War, 1785 to 1795, was not some peripheral event.
Not at all. It was a crucible of nation building.
It forced the U.S. to pay for its expansion in blood and treasure. It defined its territorial limits against a unified indigenous resistance, and it forged its military identity.
It shaped military policy, federal finance, and foreign relations with native nations, all before the end of George Washington's second term.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over based on this specific period. Consider that this war was fought and won before many core American institutions, the Supreme Court, the federal military itself, were truly stable. Given the trauma of St. Clair's defeat and then the massive effort that led to the victory at Greenville, how might the sheer necessity of winning the Ohio Valley have profoundly shaped the American constitutional understanding of federal strength? How might it have pushed the U.S. toward a more centralized, military-focused government, far faster than anyone might have intended during its very first years? It's something to think about.